Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. These are the familiar words of Emma Lazarus engraved on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. Words of an America that compelled my parents almost 38 years ago to board a plane with me, to come to what they believed was the land of opportunity, where streets are paved in gold, and whatever you dream, you can realize through hard work, no matter what your origins. All those stories led my parents to fly thousands of miles to get to these beautiful shores of our country. We ended up in Colorado. Many Korean immigrants end up on one coast or the other, east or west. We came by way of Hawaii and California. Instead of staying put, we pressed onward and inward to Colorado Springs, a little town made to feel even smaller because of Pikes Peak, an intimidating 14,000-foot mountain that loomed over every scene and sight. Eventually, though, the sight of Pikes Peak became a comforting presence. Pikes Peak is why I love Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. The church of my childhood rented out space and time from a dying white Presbyterian congregation. It was on the south side of the city in a low-income area that bordered a wealthy neighborhood called the Broadmoor. I still remember the sanctuary. It had this plush, reddish-purple carpeting that covered the entire floor. The dark spots matted down in various places all over the center aisle between the pews. Dirt and all manner of things trekked in from our shoes, ground into the threads by every step. Coffee and other food stains darkening some areas. Sunlight sustained over time lightened the carpet in other places. The pews themselves were dark wood and hard. No cushions, no comfort for the stoic Presbyterians that fill them every week. The walls on either side had clear windows. No stained glass depictions of the disciples or popular stories from the Bible. No sheep looking forlornly at us or angels looking down on us with pity. Throughout my life, our sanctuary was the site of revivals, Christmas plays, and ordination services. But my most vivid and visceral memories were the mornings every day before the sun came up, when my parents would drive me and my younger brother the 20 minutes to attend prayer services. I would lay down and stretch myself out in the pew next to my mother as the 50 or so people gathered together would sing and pray out loud. My mother whispered in Korean, and I would drift in and out of consciousness, looking up at her face, her eyes squeezed shut, hands clasped in her lap, lips moving and shoulders hunched over. I can still hear all their voices, punctuated often by weeping, outright sobbing and crying together in the sanctuary. It was home. It was where I watched my parents and many like them feel free to cry, to laugh, to sing, to breathe, to speak words that were familiar to them. It was where they were seen and heard and understood, where they could ask for help, where they felt the grounding and rooting that happens when you truly belong. And to people who look like me, foreigners, aliens, strangers, refugees, immigrants, this matters. Over the last 6 months, we've seen a revitalization of the sanctuary movement. You may recall that between 1980 and 1981, almost 1 million Central Americans crossed the U.S. border seeking asylum. Many were fleeing political oppression and violence caused by the civil wars in El Salvador and Guatemala, though some had fled Nicaragua during the 1979 revolution. Thousands of people were murdered, whether by military or paramilitary groups, and despite these blatant atrocities, official policy under the Reagan administration hindered Central Americans from obtaining asylum status. And so the sanctuary movement was a way for churches to provide a safe haven physical shelter, and other resources for those who came to flee the violence of their original countries. One of the first churches to declare itself a public sanctuary was Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson, Arizona. And then the movement quickly spread, and in its height, over 500 religious communities were committed to providing housing and shelter and legal aid and other material goods across all denominations and religious traditions. And today, once again, churches are publicly declaring themselves as sanctuary sites. Churches are working alongside other organizations to build sanctuary coalitions. Cities and universities are declaring themselves sanctuaries. Even private citizens are offering their homes, forming underground networks, getting training in bystander and witness protection and intervention. All of this because, as we have witnessed, especially in this year so far, immigration and refugee policies, including everything from building the wall to preventing refugees from entering the country, remain critical issues in our time. But the struggles and the conflicts that push and pull around immigration has long been a part of the DNA of the U.S., from the early settlers fleeing religious persecution to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, to the earliest laws that imposed quotas that offered protection for politically persecuted, like the 1952 United States Asylum Law and the 1980 Refugee Act, which brought our laws into compliance with our obligations under UN protocol. But even a cursory look at the history of U.S. immigration shows us the convoluted processes we have in place. It gives us a basic understanding that much of what we have in front of us right now is rooted in a long history of limiting and placing conditions on our so-called welcome of anyone deemed foreign, despite the original ideals of the founding of this country. I've been thinking and writing about sanctuary a lot more this past year. I've been doing campus ministry for the last 5 years. I've served as an associate pastor at 2 Presbyterian churches. I still am a pastor in a way because I have 3 children. I look at them as my parish, twins that are 6 and a 4-year-old. It is a full-time job. I've been involved in my own local community as much as I've been able to. I've been involved with student organizations at Indiana University. I've testified to a state legislature committee about it, and if you're interested, I can give you a bunch of information. I have a ton of lawyer friends that I've become because of moms groups. Those are really great to meet people and get information. I can give you resources and examples of coalitions in the breakout session, but I'm not going to talk right now about the nuts and bolts of becoming a designated sanctuary site or supporting sanctuary churches or creating sanctuary policies, because while programs and plans and action items and checklists, specific practicalities are absolutely important to the ministry of the local church, I want to talk about Jesus. The Jesus I love and follow, this Jesus lived and breathed and walked sanctuary in his earthly life. And that sanctuary was a radical hospitality, not a mint on your pillow or getting out the special doilies for tea, something I've never done in my life. I know we as a church love to talk about hospitality, and I love to think and talk about it too, but after a while, what we end up talking about becomes white noise. Especially putting the word radical in front of anything seems to sort of add to that noise as well. But the more I read the Gospels and encounter those stories in the flesh and blood in our communities, I can't deny that a particular kind of hospitality consumed his entire life. Jesus welcomed and loved every single hair on every human being, prayed and ate with the absolute least of all, transgressed boundaries that seemed impermeable, turned over tables in the temples, turned over the very pillars of our existence. The Jesus we follow, God incarnate, the Christ, was a simple carpenter from Galilee, but a prophet and undeniably a revolutionary who confronted traditions and institutions, who implicitly and organically lived, ministered, and died in such a way that while he was grounded in his context, he knew himself deeply, and this included knowing himself as the Son of God and the Son of Man. He was a Palestinian Jew, a rabbi, a teacher, but he still challenged racial, sexual, cultural, religious, gender, economic realities, anything and everything associated with the empire. And this Jesus did ministry with a compelling zeal, a creative brilliance, undoing the structures and systems with a mere parable or a blessing, a touch, a gesture, feeding, praying, until finally being undone himself on the cross. He gave up his life, and this was the ultimate act of hospitality for all. That is the radical hospitality that compels me, that Jesus exemplified for us. The willingness to put flesh and blood, body and soul on the line for others, standing in the front lines at those marches and vigils for Black Lives Matter, for women's reproductive health, for healthcare for all, for trans people, for non-binary, gender queer, gender non-conforming, agender people, making those lines and barriers not to shut out, but to embrace, to protect, to love the most vulnerable. I've learned that sanctuary is more than a physical building. It becomes a way of life. It's a constant creation of space for people to know and be known, to love and to be loved. A while ago, I reflected on the Beatitudes and how Jesus' teachings were more than pithy statements of recognition of the marginalized. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Jesus spoke blessing over those who grieved and lamented, those who sought peace, those who hungered for life, those who faced persecution and violence, those who longed for safety and for a home. But those words of blessing aren't well wishes or hollowed out hopes. They are words of protest against the current order, an oppressive regime, an expression of a God who possessed a vision of life and existence that included the total and undeniable flourishing of every single human being. A radical hospitality is the expression of resistance against those powers and structures that allow some people to live and others to die washed up on the shores of all our privilege. The church thrives then when it is a marginalized community, an outsider community, a community on the fringes. I think often of all the ways a dying white Presbyterian congregation that housed my immigrant Korean church was a sanctuary to my family, especially to my parents in the early years of our life in the U.S. We came in as traditional immigrants, taking a pathway to citizenship, but it has taken many years to feel at home, even as we continue to face racism and discrimination and constant questions of whether we belong in this country. But we were able to survive those days because of the odd and wondrous hospitality of the church. It didn't loom over us like an impenetrable fortress, like a formidable mountain to scale. The church was a space to create and recreate, to live and embody our particular humanity, to participate in the dignity of ministry and hospitality, to bless others. And it was because we clearly heard the voice that calls us beloved. Come in, come in, come in. And so we say these words to others, too, remembering and knowing what it was like to look in from the outside. Come in, come in. All you tired, you poor, you huddled masses, you homeless and helpless, you wrecked, you hungry and thirsty, you longing for life, come in.